I don't believe in the same God you don't believe in. This is what I wish I'd said to an acquaintance in a brief conversation earlier this week. He had made a comment about God that was something like, well, that dude in the sky who might smite you. And I looked heavenward with dismay and replied, oh, there's so many things wrong with that sentence. Now, we were both chuckling. It wasn't tense or anything. It was just a couple of friends talking. He referred, and in that, he referred to, he hadn't been struck by lightning yet for being a heretic. It's interesting to me that people like to be thought of or think of themselves as a heretic. But I observed to him that the way he referred to God was actually far too traditional for me. I wish I'd thought to say, I also don't believe in the God you don't believe in. I think it's more common than a lot of people realize, especially people who have little or no experience of church or who left church a long time ago. There's a common belief, a kind of stereotype about the God that church people or people who profess Christianity believe in. Probably a white-haired dude in the sky who might smite you. Probably sitting on a gilded throne like an 18th or 19th century king. We have quite the hangover from that conception of God, and more than a hangover. Over the centuries, we continue to imagine God resembling those in the highest echelons of our society. Business leaders high up in the corner offices of towers, titans of industry, celebrities on our screens, professional athletes, the tech bros. With obvious exceptions, politicians rarely make the list anymore, certainly not in the ways that kings and Caesars and pharaohs once did. But still, people who have the most money, the most power and notoriety in society remain images of God for us. That they look little different, precious little, than the more traditional dude in the sky speaks volumes. How could we imagine God? While Paul was in Athens, we hear in the book of Acts today, he was deeply distressed to see that the city was full of idols. Now, you may or may not know or remember that we are trialing a different set of readings in this season in our lectionary cycle. In the Easter season, we continued to hear Old Testament passages instead of replacing those with readings from the book of Acts, which raised the question, and the folks that were working on that, when would we hear from the book of Acts? And so it was decided in the first many weeks of Pentecost that we would hear stories of Peter and Paul and others in the early church. This year we're in Paul's year. So we've been hearing stories from the early stages of Paul's ministry as told in Acts. One of the things that has stood out to me over the weeks is just how much ground Paul covered, geographically speaking. It kind of feels like it mirrors the journeys of Jesus and Jesus' first disciples. Paul really got around, connecting with friends and foes alike all over the world, as the world was known at the time. So today we join him in Athens, where the pattern of where Paul goes, controversy follows continues. Paul was in fact taken to Athens because there'd been so much trouble in Thessalonica and Berea. And it seems like Paul just kind of can't help himself. He sees the people and their religiosity all around, and today we hear how he feels deeply distressed about it. Not one to sit around and wallow, Paul engages with everyone, Jews and Gentiles alike, in the synagogues and in the marketplace. And he pretty much annoys everybody. But at least in some, he piques curiosity. Some dismiss him as a babbler, others want to hear more. His speech in front of the Areopagus begins with Paul acknowledging the mindset of his listeners, noticing their strong religiosity. I see how extremely spiritual you are in every way. In my travels over the years, I've occasionally been struck at how religious certain places are. Jerusalem probably tops that list, although Rome is a close second. In both places, you see people like in religious garb all over the place, and it feels like the stones themselves kind of ooze religion. In a very different way, I experienced Morocco as a very religious place in the best way that can happen, with people and the society kind of in general practicing a genuine piety that seeks societal equity. Most strange, though, was the overt but backwards religiosity that's omnipresent in Las Vegas. In Vegas, there are Judeo-Christian references and iconography everywhere. I saw a billboard, for instance, for Eden. You know, Eden, paradise, a clear reference to paradise. It was a so-called gentleman's club. It was all very religious, using Christian symbols and stories in the service of what kind of God? Maybe the gods that we really worship, but we know we're not supposed to. Image, hedonism, greed. Vegas is all about play pretending, suspending societal norms in ways that I felt like revealed who and what we really worship. In Athens, Paul saw how extremely spiritual the people were and then reflected on their objects of worship, most notably an altar with the inscription, "To an unknown God." Worshipping unknown gods, or at least gods we're not willing to name, is what ancient prophets called idolatry. It's the core human failing in our relationship with the Spirit of life, with the creator of the world, with Jesus, who we call the Christ. Have no other gods before me. It's the first commandment, the one most broken most consistently in every age, and the one the prophets most consistently warn us about. Idolatry means worshiping at the feet of the biggest bully on the block. It means worshiping at the altar of narcissism or hyper-individualism. Idolatry is worshiping the power of positive thinking, or whatever the latest self-help fad might be. It's worshiping at the altar of Amazon Prime, or wherever we get the latest product that promises nirvana. Worshipping unknown gods requires little thought and even less courage. It's just going along to get along. Paul counters this worship of unknown gods, all our idols, by describing instead the God he knows, the creator of heaven and earth, who gives life and who is life. Paul goes on to recite parts of salvation history, placing us in the long line of faithful people who have known God's grace, before calling us, right along with the Athenians, to repentance. Paul calls us to put away our idols of gold or silver or stone, and with him to proclaim the God who raises us alongside Jesus, who raises us from the dead. This God is no dude in the sky who might smite us. God isn't a dude at all. And God doesn't primarily reside in the sky. And God isn't waiting to smite unbelievers or heretics with rogue lightning strikes. We know a different God, a God of resurrection, a God of life. This is the God we are called to share with all the people in our lives, our friends and family, who don't believe in the God we don't believe in either. And we do so with the hope and prayer that more will come to know the one true God, the God we worship, the God who yearns for the fullness of life for all creation.